Lineup breakdown, analysis of winning lineups. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post this at bchad50. And scores were up yet again this week. Big scoring output that outscored the Week 12 showing. And I'm here to break down those winning lineups, starting with Okie Boy 211s in the Sunday FanDuel Million that posted 224.56 points. That winning lineup had sweated out right down to the wire where Dan Bailey was the difference maker, edging out a lineup that was identical save for Washington Redskins kicker Dustin Hopkins. So quite the sweat, something unlike I've ever seen before. The fact that the lineups were identical and 3 points ended up being the separating factor with the two kickers from the Monday Night Football game certainly made it an interesting week. One of the more chalky winning lineups that we've seen so far. Just 4 players on this roster were on less than 10% of teams in the Sunday FanDuel Million, and only 2 of those players, the kicker and defense, were on less than 5%, on fewer than 5% of the roster. So a very chalky roster, starting at the top with Ben Roethlisberger, who was on 16.6% of rosters, but he certainly delivered, tossing for 4 touchdown passes, 364 yards passing, a 2-point conversion, and adding 13 yards rushing. Narrowly missed a 5th touchdown pass that overshot his receiver in the end zone, but overall certainly delivered a very big fantasy line, scoring a total of 33.86 fantasy points and putting this team off to a very good start. One of the running back positions was filled by Javaris Buck Allen, and one of the lower-owned players on this team, just 7.3% owned. Definitely one of, I wouldn't call it a diamond in the rough at 7.3%, but pretty darn close to it, and a big difference maker for this team. Just $6,800, a decent price point, and more than delivered on that. Just rushed for just 63 yards. Not a big showing on the ground, but really went nuts through the air. 12 receptions for 107 yards and a touchdown, racking up 6 points just on receptions alone, almost 11 points on receiving yards, and then the touchdown. And that's all before accounting for the rushing effort. So in all, 29 fantasy points from Buck Allen. So really great showing for him. Next up at the other running back position had a real cheap running back, David Johnson, $5,900 at the St. Louis Rams, just 30.3% owned. So yeah, quite the chalky play. Nothing just about that. Was a very popular play, and for good reason. With both Andre Ellington and more importantly, Chris Johnson injured and out this contest, David Johnson was thrust into the starting role, hence the really depressed price tag of just $5,900. Making his first start, he certainly showed out well. 120 yards from scrimmage, 99 yards rushing, 21 yards receiving, added a rushing touchdown, and 2 receptions. All in all, it was a really good showing for him. 19 fantasy points, certainly plenty for what you paid for. Definitely delivered for those who ate the chalk with him. Speaking of chalky plays, Antonio Brown, despite the fact that Vontae Davis still lurks in that Indianapolis Colts defense, gamers not shying away from Brown this week. He and Ben have been awesome this year together, and 29.3% ownership in this contest. Found the end zone 3 times, and not all of them conventionally. 2 through the air on 118 yards receiving and 8 receptions. But he also scored a touchdown on a punt return and followed that up with a ill-advised touchdown celebration. If you've seen it, your crotchal region probably hurts just a little bit. That was painful to watch. I don't know what he was thinking, even following the game with his explanation of wanting to stick to the goalpost. I mean, that's painful. But what was not painful was his fantasy scoring output. Big showing from Antonio Brown. Good pairing with Big Ben, but not the only receiver on this roster paired with Big Ben. Okie also went to the well with Martavis Bryant at $6,900 against the Colts, and this was a good pick. 4 receptions, 114 yards receiving, and a touchdown. Big play on that touchdown reception for Martavis Bryant. The duo of Pittsburgh wide receivers accounted for more than 50 fantasy points for this roster. So certainly a good pairing with Big Ben, paid off in a big way as the Steelers routed the Indianapolis Colts in prime time on Sunday Night Football. The last receiver spot was filled by the most productive receiver on the team, and that was Allen Robinson. The absence of the other Allen, the Allen brothers, Allen Hurns was out, and that paved the way for a big day for Allen Robinson in a shootout between the Jaguars and Tennessee Titans. A-Rob exploded for a line of 10 for 153 and 3 touchdowns, and at under 10% ownership, was definitely under-owned for this contest, and was a big difference maker for this roster. Wasn't the only piece that Okie had from this shootout in the AFC South. Also had Delaney Walker at tight end, 12% owned, and Walker delivered a very nice line of 8 receptions for 92 yards and a touchdown. Certainly paid off in a very favorable fantasy matchup that turned into just a treasure trove of fantasy scoring. But Walker and Robinson, great picks on this team. As I said, kicker Dan Bailey was the key, well, a key, but the key to edging out the second-place team as he outscored Dustin Hopkins by exactly 3 points, and that was the margin of victory over the second-place team in this tournament. Talk about a sweat. I mean, 52-yard game-winning field goal actually ended up being the difference maker here for this the Sunday Million. Dan Bailey hit that sweet spot of between 12 and 18 points for kicker, falling right in the middle with 15 fantasy points. If you're getting double-digit points, namely in the teens from your kicker, you certainly picked one that paid off. Finally, Kansas City defense rounded out this roster. Low ownership after disappointing gamers in week 12 against the Bills. Had some big expectations. Turned in just an okay showing. This past week they were just 2.4% owned, and showed up in a big way. They held their opponent in check, held the Raiders in check. Total 3 interceptions, including one that was returned for a touchdown, 4 sacks, and with that, the 20 points allowed really wasn't a big deal. Certainly racked up some points via the turnovers, the touchdown, and the sacks. So overall, a really good showing from the Chiefs defense that was worth 17 fantasy points on FanDuel, and that rounded out this big winning roster. Moving on to the DraftKings Millionaire Maker, your winner was one, don't try this at home, one, who had 4 rosters entered. This one was the black and yellow special, I guess you could call it. Featured 5 Steelers, which is remarkable. And the cannibalization just didn't happen here. Usually not advisable to roster that many players from the same team since there's only so many touchdowns to go around. But as you'll find out as I go through this roster, it wasn't all about touchdowns in this case. Big Ben was a carryover from the FanDuel Sunday Million, so I don't really need to dive into his line too much other than to say he was 18.5% owned, so it's a pretty popular play here, very chalky, but delivered, and delivered for both winning GPP winning lineups. Buck Allen, another carryover from the other roster, 8.1% owned, so again, under 10% ownership, and his line was even more valuable at DraftKings because so much of his value was tied to his receiving totals that day. At a full point per reception, the 12 receptions were twice as many points as they were on FanDuel, and got a yardage bonus for besting 100 yards receiving. So really a pick that set this team apart from the pack. One of the differing pieces between rosters, they did not eat the chalk with David Johnson. Instead went with D'Angelo Williams, who was also a chalky play, 32% owned. But not the same type of pick here. Grabbing a running back on the same team as a quarterback that you're using, not usually an advisable move, but in this case, D'Angelo Williams didn't need to find the end zone to have fantasy value. Rushed for 134 yards, so picked up 13.4 yards with the yardage plus the yardage bonus. for breaking 100 yards rushing, added 5 receptions for 31 yards, and even with a fumble, still turned in a solid effort that was that had to please the chalk eaters there. Antonio Brown, another carryover from the other roster, big showing, and like Javaris Buck Allen, got more points for it at DraftKings due to the point per reception, due to the yardage bonus, and also like at FanDuel, touchdown punt for on the punt return counted for Brown as well. So 3 touchdown day from him, big showing. Martavis Bryant, yet another carryover from the other roster, and this is kind of where you could say things got crazy. I mean, 2 receivers, a running back, and a quarterback from the same team. Usually it doesn't work out this way. There just is not usually enough offense to go around. But in this case, Steelers went nuts. Brown scored 3 touchdowns, including the special teams touchdown. Bryant broke the yardage bonus, also scored a single touchdown, got the yardage bonus from D'Angelo Williams. Ended up working out in this case, and really crazy quarterback, running back, wide out stack. And it paid off, as I said, paid off in a big way. Martavis Bryant's $5,600 price tag made him attractive, was 14.4% owned, but great pick here with Bryant. The final receiver spot was filled by Jeremy Maclin, just $5,200, and was under 10% owned and paid off as one of the difference makers, one of the lower owned difference makers on this roster. Followed up his big showing against the Buffalo Bills by turning in another big showing this past week. He reeled in 9 receptions for 95 yards receiving and a pair of scores. He did fumble, but overall, you could live with the line of 29.5 fantasy points, especially at $5,200 and a lowish ownership rate of 9.9%. Getting back to another chalky play, Scott Chandler was on 26.7% of rosters, and with Rob Gronkowski out and that passing game lacking other weapons like Dion Lewis and Julian Edelman, Scott Chandler was a very buzzy pick going into the weekend, and at just $2,500, the minimum salary for a tight end, it was pretty easy to understand why. Paid off his salary with 16.1 fantasy points on a 4 reception, 61-yard, 1 touchdown line, and a surprising loss for the Patriots, but Chandler did plenty at that salary beyond just freeing up salary to spend elsewhere, reached the teens in scoring, and that's more than you could usually ask for from a minimum salary tight end. Filling the flex spot was Allen Robinson, again, another carryover from the FanDuel Sunday Million. Just cracked the 10% ownership threshold in the DraftKings Millionaire Maker, 10.1% owned, but again, under-owned with Alan Hearns out. Huge showing, got the yardage bonus, got all the full point per each reception and the multiple touchdowns. Big day from Allen Robinson, big difference maker for this team. Finally, the 5th member of the Pittsburgh Steelers on this roster was actually the defense, and that does make sense. If you're going to roster all those offensive players, you got to assume that the Steelers hung a big number, putting their defense in an advantageous position. That turned out to be the case. They were just 2.6% owned against the backup quarterback-led Indianapolis Colts, and while Matt Hasselbeck looked great, or at least looked well above average in his other starts, came crashing back to earth as a 40-year-old backup quarterback thrust into starting duty this week. The Steelers allowed just 10 points while tallying 5 sacks, 2 interceptions, a fumble recovery, and Antonio Brown's return touchdown. In all, it was 21 fantasy points at DraftKings. Really big showing, and really rounded out this team nicely. Your lowest scoring member of this team was Scott Chandler at 16.1 points. No one else scored fewer than 20 points on this roster, and that's how you end up with a 276.46 fantasy point showing for your Millionaire Maker winning roster from Don't Try This at Home 1. Big showing this weekend. Your latest millionaire, courtesy Daily Fantasy Sports, and just a really big showing this week for the Steelers. Made a number of gamers happy this week. Until next week, check out dailyfantasycafe.com for all your fantasy needs, whether they're for fantasy football, fantasy basketball, college football. We've got it all. We've got some hockey content. We'll have golf content once the PGA Tour kicks back off with their regular DFS action. But Tons of great content, everything from our tools to our articles, video podcasts, and our forums. Get on there, check all that out. And until next week, good luck.